So I just realized that I made a huge mistake. This mower was one that I found a long time ago, and I'm talking about years ago, and I just realized that I never sold it and it was sitting on the shelf in the back of the shed. I'm not sure what happened to it, but there's a good chance I did not set it up for long-term storage. That means more than likely I left gasoline in the tank, which is not good. So now I have to try and get it going again, but unfortunately, I may have done more damage to it. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower, and the problem is that I just pulled it out of long-term storage, but it was not meant to be there, and now there's a good chance the fuel system has some problems with it. Now, the owner's manual has directions that you can follow if you intend on putting your equipment in long-term storage, and if you don't follow them, you might be in trouble. The first thing I want to do is to take a look around the mower and see why I might have left this project on the sidelines. And besides a brake cable that looks kind of beat up but functional, I can't tell right offhand, but it won't take long for me to find out. So if I had to guess as to the reason why this mower might have been left behind, it's probably because I missed the selling season, and after that, it simply got lost. If I were to have sold this mower when I was done with it, versus if it was earlier in the mowing season, I would have lost a lot of money. So holding on to it through the winter is what I typically do, but other factors could have played a role as well. So at first glance, it would appear that the fuel tank was empty. However, sitting in a shed for a year or two would allow all that fuel in there to evaporate away. The strange part is that all the oil was drained from the engine, which is what I do to prepare most of my equipment for storage. So does that mean I was mistaken and I did indeed prepare for it then? Well, we're about to find out here in a bit. Just as a tip, when putting fuel into a system that's been empty for a long time, only put in several ounces. That way if it leaks out, you only lose a small amount. And only after a couple of minutes has passed and no fuel is leaked from the carb can you put more into the tank. So unfortunately it didn't start, but I was pretty certain that was going to happen. Now because the carb has an auto choking system on it, we'll have to physically prime the engine with fuel and then try starting it again. And yet again, it didn't start. Next, I'm going to use this magical stick to keep the choke flap open, then we'll try that again. So what in the world just happened? Well, the reason I used the stick to hold the choke open was because I know this engine is capable of running. But the fact that it didn't even try and start made me believe that the engine was flooded with fuel, and that's partly due to the auto choking system. Now this scenario shouldn't have even happened because it should have at least tried to start. Instead, I think the carb might still have some old fuel in it and it might have interfered with it. That means we'll need to take the carb off the engine and inspect it for any kind of problems or issues. So if I recall, I do remember giving this mower a good cleaning, but I didn't go beyond the engine covers and the recoil, so I guess I'll have to do it now. Now luckily for us, it wasn't that bad, and it's mainly just dirt and grass clippings underneath here, so no need for any degreaser. But if yours has more than just dirt on it, say a lot of oil as well, then I consider using a degreaser too. So it's been a couple of hours sitting in the sun and almost all the water is gone, which means we can get to the carb and take it off. Now because of the way the fuel tank is designed, I can't drain the rest of the fuel from the top opening, so I'll connect a hose to the outlet and drain it out that way instead. The other option would have been to just cap off the outlet of the fuel tank so you don't lose any of that fuel that we put in there earlier. So the first sign of trouble just showed up in the form of some crusty stuff on the inlet port on the carb, which is also on the fuel line as well. And that means there's a really good chance that we're going to find more of that stuff inside the carb, but hopefully not. Next, we'll take the carb off and then drop the fuel bowl, and then we'll see what kind of luck we have. Now, if it's really bad, we can either try and clean off the crusty stuff, or we can take the easy way out and just buy a new carb instead. After getting the carb off the engine, I realized the O-ring that seals the carb to the intake pipe was stuck to it. If this happens to you, take off the O-ring and put it back onto the intake pipe. Otherwise, if you lose it and install the carb without it, you're going to have running, if not starting, problems. So here's the big moment. What's it going to look like inside the bowl? And what we find is really interesting. What you're seeing are three items: fresh gasoline, a patch of red colored debris, and finally a blob of water. So the water makes sense because it's from the humidity in the air, but the debris might be the thing that's messing things up. So after pouring out the stuff in the bowl, that's when we realize that the same crusty stuff from before is visible on the gasket for the bowl. And if that crusty stuff is on the gasket, that means it's also on the edge of the carb as well, which is not a good thing. So think about it. If there's a gasket there, they obviously want it to be sealed there, but with that crusty stuff there, it could cause an air or fuel leak. And once we get a look underneath the carb, what we see is a very clogged up passageway, which might explain why it's impossible to start it without priming it. So next, I'm going to give that clogged passageway a couple of shots of carb cleaner, which looks to have been just enough to clear it out. But I would like to see if we can get the rest of that crusty stuff off the edge of the carb by using the ultrasonic cleaner and using the green solution this time. And only moments after turning on the machine, we start to see something happening to the carb, which is a really good sign. Now while the carb is in the ultrasonic cleaner, I'm going to take off the front drive wheels and service them along with the drive gears. What I'm going to do is clean off the axles and then apply some sort of lubricant to it along with the inserts in each wheel. Then I'm going to try to get a thinner lubricant into the pin located behind each gear. Now to do this the right way, I should take the gear off, but that requires a lot more effort, and if you're unable to give that sort of effort, this method is better than nothing at all. Now if you do want to do it the right way and take off the drive gears, you'll need to find a way to keep the transmission from turning while taking the bolt off the gear. Sounds pretty easy, right? I forgot to mention that the bolts have thread locker on them, which means breaking them loose is very tough to do. Now once the front wheels are done, we'll then move on to the ones in the back. However, this is when things take a terrible turn. So as you can tell, the steel insert didn't want to stay in the wheel because the opening for it is quite worn out and is now too large for it. So to fix this, you could try to glue the insert back into the wheel, but instead I'm going to use this piece of plastic as a shim and then tap it back into the opening. Now the reason I'm using this method instead of a different one is because it allows me the opportunity to take the inserts back out if I need to. After that, I'll then apply a healthy amount of grease to the axle and then install the wheel. Now depending upon how bad your wheels are, applying grease at least once a year is more than enough, but you can apply it as many times as you want to. So the ultrasonic cleaner has finished all its cycles and it seems to have done a pretty decent job. Just don't forget to do a clean water rinse cycle after the cleaning cycle. We'll then put the carb back together, and even though I am a bit worried about the resting position of the float, I'm going to see if it's still going to work. Now most of all that crusty stuff that was on the edge of the carb and the bowl gasket is pretty much gone, but we might still end up replacing the gasket if we need to later on. Now if you tried to clean the carb and it's either leaking or not working like it should, I would recommend just replacing the carb, otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time trying to fix it. Now it is ultimately your choice as to how you spend your time, but in terms of getting a headache, I'd rather just skip it if possible. Now the long bolt that the air vane pivots on can sometimes get a bit dirty and grimy and could cause the choke to hang up, which is not a good thing. So to keep that from happening, I would take the bolt out and clean it with whatever you have on hand before installing it. So it is up to you if you choose to put some sort of lubricant on that bolt, but this time I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to make sure that the opening is as clean as possible, and as you can tell, it was quite dirty in there. So this is when things get a little bit weird. As I was testing the movement of both the air vane and the choke, I noticed that it seemed to be getting stuck in a certain position. And on closer inspection, I think the flap itself was catching on the casting of the number 3 in the air inlet. So after pulling the flap out of the carb, you can see where it was touching the casting, so to deal with it, I'll just smooth that area down a bit and then reinstall it back into the carb. Now once back in the carb, we can then test it again, and as you can see, it's now working like it should without hitting anything. Also, when installing the base for the air filter, make sure that you connect up the emissions hose to the port on the back of the base. Otherwise, you risk getting dust and dirt getting into the carb and into the engine, causing it to wear out faster than it should. Now this would have also been a really good time to replace the fuel line if you think it's going to break in the next couple of years. And also, if you're worried about debris in the fuel tank, this would have been a good time to wash it out with water and then let it dry out in the sun. And if you think the pull rope is beginning to look worn out or frayed and could break in the next year or two, now would have been a great time to replace it. After that, we'll then need to put the engine back together, but there's one more important item that we need to address. And that item is making sure that not only is the blade sharp, but it's also balanced as well. So this is more important than just keeping engine vibrations down to a minimum. It's also making sure that it's going to last as long as possible. You don't need to use a cone balancer like this one I'm using. A simple nail in the wall would work too, but I will let you know some ways work better than others. The last and final item left before we start it is to add just a bit more gasoline to the fuel tank. We'll then put the pull rope back on its guide again on the handlebar and then try starting it. Hopefully we won't need that magic stick again. So it started right up, which is good, but how is it going to start once the engine's hot? So the good news is that the engine starts reliably and runs well enough. However, you already know the bad news, and that is it's got a little rod knock, but is it really a bad thing? So rod knock is the sound the big end of the connecting rod makes while the engine is running due to the clearance to the crankshaft journal becoming too large. Now this typically happens as a result from running the engine low on oil for a long period of time. And when this happens, the wear will increase from a little tap to a louder tap until it's so loud you'll need hearing protection while the mower is running. The thing is, once the oil level returns to normal, the wear will also return to normal as well, and the knocking will not get any worse. So my plan is to put this mower up for sale after I do my longer test run, but I do plan on asking less than usual because of the wear. Now most understand that when buying a used mower there are no guarantees, but if you get a mower for 25% off, there's probably a good reason why. So my question is, knowing that this mower has a bit of rod knock, would you buy it at a discount? Or would you pass on it and pay a lot more for one with a lot less wear on the engine? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.